One of the things you mentioned in your writing was that in Mississippi and Louisiana, that some of the state penitentiaries are located on former plantations. Um, Sort of connected to that is this idea that, in certain neighborhoods where there's just been generations of lack of economic opportunity and lack of education opportunities tied to the housing values, um, they've just been generationally at a disadvantage. With the extreme example of the plantation turning into a penitentiary, I'm just curious, when you think about the trauma and the intergenerational trauma and sort of the foundational wounds that land holds, what is transforming something like that? What does that look like? What might that process, be? Like, what's a way out of that?
We can't separate the history of the land from like its present incarnation, right? So it matters. It matters that Louisiana Penitentiary was formerly a plantation. That's not a coincidence. There's a direct history there, right? So when we talk about like how are we going to transform the land, how are we going to transform institutions, I think it has to be like a history conscious process, a process that's informed by history, but is also very intentional about what it is that we are aiming towards. So for instance, if we say like we are going to abolish, prisons, we have to look at how the prison system as it exists today essentially became a replacement for the slave labor system. There was a period of time, obviously, we had like Reconstruction, where we got the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. You had Black people being elected to Congress. You had, the building of more, historically Black colleges and universities. And then there was a backlash to that. There was a calculated backlash of, developing Jim Crow segregation and creating the lost cause myth and using the prison system as kind of like the replacement for creating cheap labor, and that kind of became the new norm. So I think we have to look at that and we have to ask ourselves, like, what does it mean to have human rights, right? Even I mean, obviously one of the major issues with prison is there's a whole lot of people locked up who should not be locked up at all, right? And we clearly see people who are privileged committing blatant crimes, including people who are in elected office and they're never held accountable. But even that issue aside, like let's look at situations where somebody actually commits harm against someone else, right? Like in a real way in the community. How do we deal with that in a way that is not so replicating that same violence?